so this image right here, I'm going to select. Now, I chose a raw image to download. In the beginning of the course, you're going to have JPEGs. So I'm going to show you how to do this and take this image as a raw file, which we'll be shooting later in the course, to Photoshop. And there's this thing called Camera Raw, this application. Now, this is an intermediary application that's going to take us to Photoshop that I'll explain in more depth later, but I'm just going to show you how to open it, and then I'll provide a whole separate demo on how to specifically edit your images in Adobe Raw to prepare them for Photoshop. So for right now, I'm going to double click this or select this icon. When I double click this, it opens Camera Raw, and it has a bunch of presets and settings and alterations we can make in here, but I'm not going to do that right now. Like I said, I'm going to take us directly into Photoshop. So you have some options here. I'm going to open as an object copy. I'm going to just select open. And this image now is going to open itself up into Adobe Photoshop, which I am currently in. Okay, and I'm going to open up this window. So now we're in Adobe Photoshop, and I'm going to show you how I specifically want to start out our edits, and this will be based on our first assignment. Okay, so a couple things I want you to know about this interface. When I opened up this image in this, it has some presets for how I like to have it, but I want you to notice right up here in this corner here, there's this icon that looks kind of like the window that we're in, and I just selected Essentials here. And it has a drop-down menu. I want you to be in what's called Photography. The reason I want you to be there because in general, all the things that we want to use Photoshop for, Photoshop's way more dynamic and can take on a whole range of creative uses. Like you can create images from scratch that have nothing to do with photography, paintings, that kind of stuff, digital paintings, drawings, whatever you can use and create in Photoshop. We're using it for photography specifically, so having a preset of windows and tools that are geared toward photography is very helpful. So the first thing I'd like you to do is be in that photography mode. Now you'll have an image open here, and it works kind of like a tab here, so I just want you to know when I grab where that file name is, you can see I can have it as a floating window, or I can drag it and put it back in, and when it highlights there, it creates a kind of tab situation. So if you open up multiple images, they'll open up like tabs in a web browser. Now over here down in this corner, you'll see that there's a layer option panel here, and this layer here is called the background layer currently. The very first thing I want you to do is I want you to right click on that, and I want you to duplicate that layer. Now there's another way of doing this. This little icon here that's a series of stacked lines, you select that, you can also find duplicate layer. Now we're just making a background copy. Now the reason we're doing that is because we're going to make a series of edits to this file and this image, and it's really wise to have a retreat or a way to get back to the very beginning. And so you'll notice that there's a background copy here, and there's a little icon here that shows a lock symbol. That lock symbol is going to be protection to keep that background solid and locked. So when we make creative edits, we can always not only view what it was before we did anything, but also as a fail-safe to come back to the original, so we don't accidentally lose that data. Now, once I did that and I created a background copy, the very first thing I like to do as another security measure is I like to save this file. So I go up to File, and I go to Save As, And what it does when I go to File Save As is now you can see it's returning me in my computer to that raw folder. I'm going to go back to this part 2 of this long assignment here. So I'm navigating assignments, long 1, part 2. I'm going to save this as a Photoshop document. Now because I made that background copy, it defaults to switching this to a Photoshop file. You'll notice this as .psd. Okay, that's important. I want that to be a Photoshop file because I want it to be a reminder that all my creative edits are done to this file. So I'm going to hit save, hit OK, and now I'm ready to make creative edits. And you'll notice up here it says .psd. That lets me know that I'm in that document that I'm going to create creative edits to. Now, in your first assignment, I have you do a few things, and we're going to work on what are called adjustment layers. Now, up here, some of you guys, by default, might see libraries here. I'm going to go to what are called adjustments. Now, you can also find this by going to Window and selecting Adjustments, and it will open up this window pane. Now, we're going to create what are called adjustment layers, and adjustment layers are edits that are coded edits that are going to happen to your image but aren't destructive to your edit or to your image. What I mean by that is that you're going to be creating what is a separate layer that tells Photoshop to do a certain action to your image layer. Now that's going to make sense more and more when we start working with layers, but essentially if I wanted to change, say, this background copy to black and white, I could do that, but I could do it in a destructive way where that becomes a permanent edit to that layer or this background copy. Or I can do what's called an adjustment layer. In this case, if you see this icon here, this is your black and white adjustment layer. If I select that, what it does is creates what's called a layer mask. And this adjustment layer mask is saying to Photoshop, when you open up this file as a Photoshop document in Photoshop, do this action, do black and white to this image layer. Now notice there's a little eyeball here next to this layer. Watch, if I deselect that, it shows me what it is without that adjustment layer being active. When I select it, it's active, and it's created a black and white overlay essentially to this image layer. Now what it also did is automatically opened up a properties pane of presets and adjustments you can make to that black and white layer. And I want you to play around with this. I want you to see what, maybe if I selected a lighter preset or a red filter, what happens to that adjustment layer. Maximum white or maximum black. These are all filters that that are preset digitally to say, do these commands, make these adjustments in order to change or alter what type of black and white I would like this image to be rendered as. So for me, I'm gonna, I don't know, for fun, I'll just stick with this. I kind of liked this red filter one. That was fun. Okay, now that's a single adjustment layer. We're going to play around with the ability to do 2 other adjustment layers. I'm going to maybe change the contrast. So you'll see this adjustment layer, brightness contrast, I'm creating more contrast, and I'm going to darken that image slightly. Okay, now if I wanted to bring color back in to this image, I could, let's see, I think I could create a photo filter adjustment layer, and then maybe I want to make this image green. And notice here it says density. I'm going to increase the density. So now I've created a green overlay on top of this image. Now I've created 3 adjustment layers here. one black and white and two creative ones. One I brought in the end color back in to this image. Okay, now those are just some really basic edits, and we're creating layers, adjustment layers, and adjustment layers are in essence masks within Photoshop, and we're going to get into what layer masks are as we get more advanced in the course as well. Okay, now this is still a Photoshop document, but it's unsaved. And I know it's unsaved because that little icon right there, that asterisk, is telling me that it's unsaved. I'm going to go ahead and File, Save, okay, as a Photoshop document.